I opened my mailbox and saw an envelope with the HOA logo. Another piece of paper with demands? Nonsense. But when I read the reason for my fine, I had to reread it 3 times. They decided my roof was too dusty. I thought it was a joke, but when I called the HOA, Barbara Langley, the queen of the neighborhood, told me that if I didn't like their rules, I could simply sell my house and leave. That was the last straw. I didn't just refuse to comply. I turned my roof into a nightmare the HOA would never forget. But what happened next put an end to Barbara's reign and changed the entire neighborhood. But let's start from the very beginning. I moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago, expecting it to be the perfect place to live. A quiet street, fresh air, friendly neighbors, and a cozy backyard. Just what I needed after years in a noisy city. Everything seemed ideal, except for one thing. The local homeowners association, the HOA. These guys. They turned people's lives into bureaucratic hell. I had heard stories about their absurd nitpicking, but I never thought they would come after me. They fined my neighbor for grass that was too long, another family for a mailbox color that supposedly didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic. One guy was even ordered to tear down his shed because its roof wasn't a neutral enough shade. But this time they outdid themselves. Your home disrupts the neighborhood's aesthetics. One morning, while checking my mail, I noticed an envelope with the HOA's official seal. Letters from them never brought good news, but honestly, I wasn't expecting this level of nonsense. Dear Mr. Walsh, during a recent inspection, it was found that your roof contains an excessive amount of dust, violating Section 7.3 of the neighborhood's Residential Aesthetics Maintenance Guidelines. Therefore, you are required to clean your roof within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in a $500 fine. I read it 3 times. Dust on the roof? Are they serious? At first I laughed, thinking it had to be a joke. Maybe a prank from a new neighbor? I checked the HOA's website and combed through the rulebook. Nothing like this was mentioned anywhere. But when I looked into the local neighborhood group, my laughter quickly turned into shock. It turned out I wasn't the first. People were already complaining that the HOA was literally making up reasons to issue fines. One guy was forced to repaint his fence because his shade of white was not white enough. Another family was ordered to replace their flower beds because the colors didn't match the neighborhood's theme. Someone even got fined because their car was parked 6 inches over the driveway boundary. But dust on a roof? That was a new level of insanity. What's next? A fine for the shape of the clouds above my house? I stepped outside and looked at my roof. Sure, it was like everyone else's. Just regular gray-brown shingles with a thin layer of street dust. Nothing criminal, nothing that stood out. Then I looked around. Wait a second, I muttered, scanning the neighboring houses. And guess what? Everyone's roof looked exactly the same. Had they sent similar notices to everyone, or were they specifically targeting me? My blood started to boil. The HOA clearly thought they could walk all over me, just like they did with everyone else. Did they really think I would just give in, scrub my roof, or pay their stupid fine? They had no idea who they were messing with. I wasn't about to comply with a ridiculous fine for dust on my roof. The HOA might have intimidated others, but they weren't going to pull that trick on me. So I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for Barbara Langley, HOA president. Barbara was something of a self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, though dictator would be a more accurate title. She lived in the biggest house on the street, always appeared with perfectly styled silver hair, and had the constant expression of someone who had a personal contract with God to control everything happening in this neighborhood. Homeowners Association speaking. Her voice sounded like I had just interrupted her while she was calculating taxes for a Mars colony. Barbara, it's Walsh, I began. I got a notice about dust on my roof. This has to be a mistake, right? Oh, no mistake at all, Mr. Walsh, she replied in a tone so sugary it practically dripped venom. You must follow the rules. Rules? Barbara, it's a roof. Who's even looking at it? Do you have an HOA drone flying over houses? She paused for a moment before responding in a cold, measured voice. That is irrelevant. The HOA is responsible for maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic. You will clean your roof or you will be fined. I clenched my fists. But this is ridiculous. The HOA's own rulebook doesn't even mention roof cleanliness anywhere. Barbara sighed, like she was explaining to a child why they couldn't draw on the walls with markers. Mr. Walsh, she said with exaggerated patience, the HOA has the right to make adjustments as needed to maintain the neighborhood's standards. I felt my anger bubbling over. And where exactly is that stated in the rules? If you have concerns, you are welcome to attend the HOA meeting, she said before hanging up on me. Oh, Barbara. You wanted a fight? Fine. I wasn't the type to just accept the HOA's nonsense without question. If they thought they could fine me over a made-up rule, I had a surprise for them. I printed out every HOA document and spent the evening studying every single line of their rules. I went over them again and again. And you know what I found? Nothing. Nowhere in the entire HOA rulebook was there any mention of roof cleanliness. No requirement that it be clean, washed, or even referenced in the context of fines at all. This was pure Barbara's power trip. The HOA meeting. My battlefield. 2 days later, I went to the HOA meeting. The small clubhouse was packed with neighbors sitting on plastic chairs. At the entrance stood Barbara herself, looking like she was about to hand out court summonses to people for choosing the wrong curtain color. When the discussion turned to fines, I stood up, holding my printed rules in my hands. I'd like to discuss my citation for dust on my roof, I said loudly. Barbara gave me a fake look of surprise. Ah, Mr. Walsh, you were supposed to submit a written request in advance. No, Barbara, let's talk about it now, I said firmly. Show me where in the HOA rules it mentions anything about roof dust. The room murmured. Many neighbors had also received fines for ridiculous reasons, but no one had ever dared to challenge Barbara directly. We discuss these matters in private, not in a meeting, she said sweetly. I lifted my printed rulebook. No, we discuss violations at HOA meetings, right? So let's look at the rules and see exactly where it says anything about dust. Barbara's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a friendly one. If you don't like the rules of this community, she said, staring directly at me, you are always welcome to sell your home and leave. That was it. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She flat out admitted that her goal was to squeeze money out of people and force out anyone who didn't submit to her ridiculous power trip. Well, if she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. I had a plan. And Barbara? She was in for a big surprise. Decision made. They won't forget this. I came home furious. Not just angry. I was shaking with rage. Barbara wasn't even trying to hide the fact that all these fines were nothing but a money grab. They knew that most people would just give in and pay to avoid the hassle. But I wasn't most people. I wasn't just going to fight their decision. I was going to shove their own rules right in their faces. If they cared so much about the way my roof looked, I was going to make sure it became the most noticeable thing in the entire neighborhood. The plan was simple. Paint my roof the most ridiculous, eye-catching color possible. Do it legally, so the HOA couldn't do anything about it. Sit back and enjoy watching them lose their minds. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for the brightest, most obnoxious paint I could find. I scrolled through neon greens, blinding oranges, and fluorescent yellows. But when I saw neon hot pink, a blinding bubblegum shade that looked like melted candy under the summer sun, I knew I had found the one. This was the color that would make Barbara's eyes bleed every time she looked out her window. Make it visible from space. I wasn't going to do this myself. I hired professional painters to ensure everything was done legally and flawlessly. When the crew arrived and I showed them the paint, their faces were priceless. Are you sure?" one of them asked, eyeing the bucket of radioactive pink paint. 200% sure. Aren't you worried that, well, it's going to be a little genius? Yeah, that's the goal. 2 days later, my roof had become the HOA's worst nightmare. It glowed in the sunlight like the neon sign of a sketchy nightclub. Standing across the street, looking up at my masterpiece, I felt like I had just installed a beacon that could be seen from orbit. It was perfect. Final touch. "Hello, HOA!" But just painting the roof wasn't enough. I wanted them to see it every single day, and know it was for them. So once the paint dried, I bought huge stencils and a can of gold spray paint, and right on the most visible part of the roof, where it could be seen from the main road, I sprayed gigantic shiny gold letters, "Hello, HOA!" The golden letters shimmered in the sun, turning my roof into a massive, defiant billboard. I even made them slightly crooked, just to add to the chaotic energy. Now, whenever Barbara and her minions looked out from their pristine homes, the first thing they would see was my roof screaming in their faces. It was a work of art. Neighborhood. Reaction. Absolute chaos. I didn't expect the reaction to be this instant. The moment I stepped outside, people stopped in their tracks and started filming. "Are you serious?" My neighbor Tom burst out laughing. "Dude, this is perfect," his wife said, pulling out her phone. "Can I take a picture?" "Bro, get this on social media. More people need to see this." Within an hour, my street had turned into an art exhibition. People were bringing their friends to see it. Someone launched a drone to film it from above. A kid from down the street called it the coolest house he's ever seen. But, of course, not everyone was thrilled. Barbara and her army were livid. The next morning, I found a new letter from the HOA in my mailbox. Only now, the tone was completely different. "Your home violates the neighborhood's aesthetics. You must immediately repaint your roof to comply with HOA regulations. Failure to do so will result in fines." Only one small problem. There were no HOA regulations about roof colors. They were trying to scare me, but I was already 3 steps ahead. Now, it was war. HOA crossed the line. Now they'd pay for it. The letters didn't stop. Every morning, my mailbox contained another masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense. Each one demanded that I immediately repaint my roof, threatened me with new fines, and even hinted at legal action. Barbara was raging. She couldn't allow someone to publicly defy her rule. But I had one advantage. I knew they had no case. Their own rules said nothing about roof colors. They were making things up as they went. Well, it was time to hit back. Time to play big. I found a lawyer who specialized in fighting HOAs. His name was Jonathan Mercer, and he had what seemed to be a God-given mission to destroy corrupt homeowner associations. When I told him my story, he laughed. Oh, they messed up. We filed a formal lawsuit against the HOA, accusing them of abuse of power, discrimination, and harassment, fining me over a rule that doesn't exist. A court date was set. Barbara, of course, couldn't ignore it. The HOA hired a lawyer, confident they could crush me. They had no idea what was coming. The courtroom showdown. The judge was a no-nonsense man in his 60s, with a look that said he had dealt with far too many idiots in his career. HOA's lawyer started by painting me as a troublemaker who undermined the community's aesthetic. But the moment he started listing my violations, the judge cut him off. Where in the HOA's bylaws does it mention roof color regulations? Silence. The lawyer stammered something about visual harmony. The judge squinted at me. "Mr. Walsh, why did you choose this color?" I grinned. HOA demanded that my roof be clean and aesthetically pleasing. I figured if it had to stand out, it might as well really stand out. For a brief moment, I swear the judge almost smirked. Barbara turned pale. Then the judge slammed down his ruling. HOA cannot enforce rules that do not exist. All fines against Mr. Walsh are void. Additionally, HOA must cover his legal fees. Bam! Barbara's face turned red with rage, but she couldn't do anything. HOA had just suffered a humiliating defeat. The final blow to HOA. After the trial, I wanted to see just how much people hated Barbara. I conducted a neighborhood survey and found that 80% of residents hated the HOA's policies. 50% had been fined over nonsense reasons, but most were too scared to challenge her. Well, not anymore. At the next HOA elections, I led the charge against Barbara. The result? Barbara was voted out. A new, reasonable president was elected, and they overhauled the HOA's ridiculous policies. And my roof? I kept it neon pink for 2 more months, just so everyone remembered the lesson.